It's June in New York City, the sky is high, and the streets are crowded with pedestrians walking briskly. The sunlight melted through the cracks in the curtains and reflected on the wooden floors of our apartment. Emily and I sat at opposite ends of the dining table, the morning light streaming in on her face, making her familiar face look soft and hazy. Breakfast is set in front of us, but few people move their knives and forks. Despite the seeming harmony of life, the details reveal a hidden crisis. Emily, a talented freelance writer, stares down at the coffee cup in her hand as if contemplating something she hasn't told her. Our conversations gradually became mechanized and lacked the warmth and pleasure of the past. Emily and I met at a literary salon in college. She was passionate and had a vision of the future in her eyes. We fell in love, got married, and thought the relationship would last forever. However, as time went on, our lives drifted away from the initial trajectory. "What's the plan for today?" I asked as I tried to break the silence. She looked up, her eyes seeming to wander to the door. "Write a little something. Got a couple more client drafts to catch up on." There was a hint of exhaustion in her voice that I had trouble catching. I nodded slightly and buried my head in my own mail. Despite sitting at the same table, it was as if we were separated by a transparent wall. Living under the same roof, we were no longer as connected as we once were. After breakfast, I walked into my study and turned on my computer. In front of me were endless codes and an unfinished project. In the world of technology, I am often immersed in a sea of program code, ignoring the people and things around me, and Emily's writing has become a way for her to relieve her loneliness alone. I began to think back. When did the distance between us become so far? Maybe it was when I took over that big project and started to work overtime frequently. Maybe it was when Emily accepted that job that required frequent traveling. The center of gravity of our lives gradually drifted away, and we spent less and less time together. When night came, I dragged my tired body out of the study and saw Emily still sitting in front of the computer, the bright light of the screen reflecting her face pale. Her deep-set eyes revealed endless exhaustion and confusion, as if expecting some kind of untouchable solace. "Get some early rest," I said softly as I walked over. She nods, but doesn't leave her seat. I know that somewhere inside her she is being consumed by an unnameable loneliness and emptiness, and I, as her husband, am powerless to do anything about it. This powerlessness made me feel frustrated and self-conscious. One night, a few days later, I overheard Emily's laughter coming from the den, a long-lost, heartfelt laughter. It sent a jolt through my heart, as if it had traveled back in time from those happy times. I walked to the door of the den, only to see her quickly turn off the screen as if she had done something wrong. "Talking about what?" I asked, trying to be light-hearted, a twinge of unease welling up in my mind. She smiled and said, "Oh, just chatting with some internet friends and relaxing." I nodded, but I felt vaguely uneasy in my mind. That night, I lay in bed tossing and turning, my mind constantly replaying the moment she turned off the screen, feeling a sense of crisis that I had never felt before. My sharp intuition as a programmer told me that there must be something hidden behind this. In retrospect, Emily had mentioned many times that she felt lonely and wanted more communication and understanding. However, I was busy with work at the time and only responded perfunctorily without really understanding her needs. Thinking about it now, perhaps it was this long-term neglect that made her start to seek other emotional supports. Late at night, a week later, I was in my study continuing my work when Emily's whispered laughter suddenly came out of my otherwise silent apartment. As I approached her room, I heard her chatting happily with someone in front of her screen. She was oblivious to the fact that I was standing outside the door, seemingly immersed in a strange and hidden world. "Daniel, what do you think of the beginning of this article?" She interrupted my thoughts by suddenly turning around and asking. I froze, trying to hide the uneasiness in my mind, and walked over to look at the screen, which showed an unfinished press release. I forced a smile and said, "Nice and engaging." She nodded, then continued tapping away at the keyboard without another word. This feeling that something was wrong took root in me, and I decided to find out. At that moment, I realized that our marriage was facing a major challenge. Emily seemed to find some sort of solace in the virtual world, and I, as her husband, was unable to give her the emotional support she needed. This realization left me with a deep sense of frustration and fear. Late one weekend night, I logged onto her laptop, looking for clues. I soon found an anonymous chat room called The Sound of Silence. This place seemed to be her secret garden, where she found some kind of long-lost solace. On the screen, she was chatting happily with someone named Ghost. Their conversation was full of warmth and intimacy. Emily looked so natural and happy in that moment. Emily looked so natural and happy in that moment, and it made my heart clench with a sense of danger that I had never felt before. I quickly shut down my computer and returned to bed, but with mixed feelings. Emily had found what she longed for in the virtual world, and could I still pull her back from that lost digital world? The question hovered in my mind for a long time until the early morning sunlight once again poured through the curtains. The day was about to begin, and there was a vague feeling in the back of my mind that this day was going to be different. I knew that I had to take action or I might lose Emily forever, but how to bring her back into the real world without hurting her became my biggest challenge. Over the next few days, I paid more attention to Emily's every move. She was still busy writing every day, but her mood seemed much more alive. The smile that flashed on her face and her eyes, which had not shone for a long time, grew brighter, as if she had found another rainbow in her life. Whenever she was in her study, I could always hear her having a pleasant conversation with someone. Emily used to be a lover of the outdoors, and we used to go on excursions and hikes together to enjoy the beauty of nature. However, with the busyness of work and the pressures of life, these activities have dwindled and her world seems to be more and more confined to the computer screen. I began to reflect on whether it was our neglect of those common interests and times that led to our current estrangement. One night, I surreptitiously checked her unclosed computer screen while she was walking away and found a troubling conversation. "Hey Ghost, are you there?" She tapped away on the keyboard. "Of course we are. Silent sound is our safe haven." A reply from Ghost quickly popped up on the screen. It was as if I could see that long-lost smile she was wearing, and it struck me as unfamiliar. A smile that once belonged to me, but now blossomed because of a stranger in the virtual world. "Today I wrote an article about human emotions that I wanted to share with you." She continued to reply. "Would you like to hear it?" "Of course, my dear. Your writing is always so moving." Ghost's reply made her smile widen. When I saw this, my heart felt like it had been gripped hard by something. I remembered when we first met, Emily was also often excited to share her articles with me. At that time, I always listened with full attention, giving sincere comments and encouragement. But I don't know when I became busy and detached, no longer having the patience to listen to her creations. Her conversations with Ghost were filled with warmth and intimacy, as if they had been close friends for years. I hid outside the door with mixed feelings, watching the trust and emotion between them build in the virtual world. The solace Emily couldn't get in real life was found here, and she found a long-lost sense of warmth and acceptance in Ghost companionship, which I couldn't give her. This realization left me feeling deeply frustrated and self-condemned. I began to reminisce about our married life and try to find out the root of the problem. Maybe I was too focused on my work and neglected Emily's emotional needs. Maybe our communication gradually decreased and we no longer shared each other's joys and sorrows as we used to. Each night, Emily's conversations with Ghost seemed to become a ritual, leaving her refreshed and hopeful. I, on the other hand, could only watch silently in the darkness, feeling a sense of loss and crisis that I had never felt before. I began to wonder if I should have an honest talk with Emily, expressing my concern and love. But I was afraid that doing so would push her away and make her even more dependent on that virtual world. One night, she had a particularly long conversation with Ghost, and the light in her eyes grew brighter. She shut down her computer, walked over to the bed, and looked at me, full of happiness. I wanted to ask questions, but swallowed all of them. "How was your day, honey?" I tried to ask one night. "It's okay, just a little busy," she replied out of habit, but with a hint of recently dissipated joy in her eyes. She had found that long-lost sense of warmth and identity that, once upon a time, I had given her. Now, I became a bystander on the other side of the screen, watching her find everything she craved in that stranger. The feeling made me both miserable and helpless, and I began to wonder if I could still save the marriage. After noticing the changes in Emily, I was determined to try to save our marriage. I began to reminisce about the times when we were in love, and those good memories gave me courage. I decided to talk to Emily in the hope of reestablishing our emotional connection. One weekend night, I prepared a special dinner, lit candles, and created a romantic date in an attempt to bring us back to our old intimate times. I chose Emily's favorite Italian dish and found the same red wine we drank on our first date. Emily watched this with a hint of surprise on her face, but more than anything else, she was worried. Because I know that moves like this have been few and far between lately, and maybe she no longer expects them. "Daniel, what is all this about?" she asked, her tone a mixture of uncertainty and anticipation. "Emily, I just want us to be close again," I said gently, taking her hand and trying to make her feel my sincerity. "It's been a long time since we've had a good time together, and I think we need a moment like this." She smiled slightly, but there was a hint of helplessness in that smile. "We haven't been like this in a long time." We had dinner by candlelight and talked about odds and ends. I tried to lighten the mood, but her mind always seemed to drift elsewhere. I brought up our past, those happy memories, hoping to jog her memory of how much she cherished our relationship. After dinner, she and I watched the night view from our balcony and tried to connect deeply. New York is lit up at night, and once we used to snuggle together and share visions of the future. Now, an invisible wall seemed to stand between us. "Emily, I feel like we're growing apart. You've been changing lately, and it's confusing me," I said bluntly, my heart filled with anticipation for her to open up. She was silent for a moment, then sighed softly. "Daniel, it's not your fault. It's just that there are some things that keep me from finding answers. I find some solace in the virtual world where I feel understood. But we're a couple. We should support and understand each other. I want to be that shoulder you lean on." I held her hand tightly, sincerity in my eyes. "Tell me, Emily, what did I do wrong? How can we get back to feeling the way we used to?" She was teary-eyed and her voice trembled. "I wish it were so, but the stress and loneliness of reality makes it hard to find a way out. That chat room, at least it made me feel like someone cared about me." Her words pierced my heart like a sharp blade, making me feel deeply powerless. I couldn't blame her, because I could feel the loneliness and pain she felt in her heart that she couldn't get rid of. I began to realize that the problem was not only in the virtual world, but also in the gap that had accumulated between us for a long time. "Emily, I'm sorry I didn't realize you felt so alone," I whispered. "But can that virtual world really give you everything you want? We can work together and rebuild our relationship." She looked at me with mixed emotions in her eyes. "Daniel, I don't know. All I know is that I felt understood and appreciated. But I also know that it wasn't real." That night, my attempts to get my wife back seemed fruitless. I realized that perhaps it wasn't just me. She needed to find a realistic way out of the virtual world, and I, for one, had to guard the marriage more carefully. She still searches for warmth and acceptance in our shared life every day, but her heart, it seems, is getting farther and farther away. I can only accompany her in silence, waiting for an opportunity to bring her back into our world. Emily's connection with Ghost grew stronger and stronger, and her laughter and joyful expressions pierced my heart every night. I gradually realized that communication and concern alone could not bring her back. Her heart had long been taken by the mysterious man in the virtual world. I decided to use my professional skills as a programmer to find out the real identity of this ghost and restore the person behind the scene who took away my wife. This decision was not taken lightly. I knew that doing so might violate Emily's privacy and might even completely destroy the remaining trust between us. However, I felt a deep sense of powerlessness and fear as I watched Emily become more and more addicted to the virtual world. I told myself that it was for Emily's protection and for the sake of our marriage. Late one night, Emily was already asleep. I entered her study unnoticed, turned on her computer, logged on to the Voice of Silence chat room, and began a stealthy pursuit. My hands flew over the keyboard, but my heart was beating so fast it almost beat out of my chest. I scanned her chat logs, intercepted all the communication data, and used reverse tracking technology to gradually peel off the disguise of the other party. In the process, I had to deal with intimate conversations between Emily and Ghost. Every word was like a sharp blade that pierced my heart. I saw Emily tell Ghost about her loneliness, her dreams, and even her disappointment in our marriage. These words were painful, but at the same time, they strengthened my resolve to reveal the truth. In the first few hours, there was no progress. The other party seems to know the way of network security. All kinds of protection measures make it difficult for me to find a breakthrough. But I didn't give up, closely analyzed his communication patterns and behavioral paths, and finally locked a suspicious IP address. The address was attributed to an anonymous VPN service, a layer of protection I knew was designed to hide the user's true identity. Further tracking led me to Ghost's email address. Using social engineering techniques, I finally found some clues through database searches and cross-checking information. The email address was associated with a man named Mark, a former classmate of Emily's from college. Mark, a name Emily had forgotten for a while, comes back to mind. During his college days, he had a strong crush on Emily, but broke up with her due to some misunderstanding. Has he been waiting in the shadows for an opportunity for revenge? I began to recall the college memories that Emily had mentioned. Mark was an introverted literature enthusiast who was always quietly present at Emily's side. They became friends because of their common interests, but Mark always seemed to want to go further. However, Emily only saw him as a friend at the time and eventually chose me. Could this be Mark's motive for orchestrating all of this? Over the next few days, I continued to gather more evidence, including intercepted chat logs, tracks of false identities in use, and his various disguises in anonymous chat rooms. Mark wasn't just an emotional liar, he was a master of the art of technology and seamless disguises, manipulating other people's emotions for his own personal gain. All of this made me feel both angry and terrified. In the process, I realized that Mark was more than a simple emotional PUA expert, as if there was a more hidden secret. At the same time, I began to reflect on my own behavior. Was I somehow invading Emily's privacy as well? My original intention was to protect her, but was my behavior equally questionable? These questions kept me up at night. When I saw this, I just felt a sense of horror, not only because my wife was caught up in it, but also because of the huge risks that existed in this virtual world, which made people shudder. I began to realize that while technology brings convenience, it also provides opportunities for those with ulterior motives. That night, I couldn't hide and live with the pain of secrecy any longer and decided to lay the truth out for Emily to see. I walked into her study and saw her chatting with Ghost, and with an internal decision, I grabbed her laptop and cut off the conversation. "Daniel, are you crazy?" She looked at me in shock, anger, and fear in her eyes. "Emily, do you know who this Ghost is?" I asked coldly, my heart filled with conflicting emotions. He's the one who understands me." She tried to take the computer back. "He's Mark, your classmate from college. Your so-called Ghost is really just a liar who manipulated your emotions." I angrily slammed the survey results on the table, enduring endless pain in my heart. She picked up those evidences, and her whole being seemed to break down. Tears welled up in her eyes as she couldn't believe that the man who had warmed her for so many days and nights was a dangerous man with a vindictive streak. "I didn't know this was going to turn out this way. I was just looking for some understanding and comfort." She choked out, tears sliding down her cheeks. Our argument erupted so swiftly that it seemed to unleash all of our repressed emotions in one fell swoop. I accused her of Mark's manipulation and her emotional betrayal, while she confronted her mistakes in confession. It all exploded like a bomb, crushing me completely. I always thought I had it under control, but in reality it was overwhelming. She whimpered, her pained expression breaking my heart. "You don't know what this means to us. It's not just emotional cheating, it's a betrayal of our marriage." My voice stung in the night. The argument made the rift between us more pronounced, and the foundation of our marriage seemed to crumble instantly. She was horrified and angry, while I was helpless and in pain. We were each silent for a long time, and eventually we both chose to hold back and calm down. Even though the truth has been revealed, I know that this is only the beginning of repairing our relationship. We still had a long way to go and needed to rebuild trust and learn to communicate again. I look at Emily with a mixture of anger and compassion. I knew that we both needed time to heal this hurt and find each other again. Although it was revealed that Ghost's true identity was Mark, the story didn't end there. As I followed him further, Mark's behavior became more complex and secretive. He seems to be more threatening than I thought, not only an emotional liar, but also an emotional PUA expert and financial fraudster who is good at using technology to manipulate others. The realization sent a chill down my spine. I began to think back on Emily's recent behavioral changes, and details that I had once overlooked suddenly became clear. Her mood swings, her dependence on her cell phone, and even her occasional outpouring of guilt all took on new interpretations. I realized that Emily may have been in deeper than I thought. One night, Emily continued to chat with Ghost in her study, which made me decide to dig deeper into Mark's behind-the-scenes operation. I need to find out more about him and expose him for what he is. Despite the revelation of his true identity, I sensed there was something darker going on behind the scenes. Once again, I infiltrated the back end of the Voice of Silence chat room and started to trace more traces of the network. Mark was obviously more vigilant, and his every action was more and more covered up. In order to find more evidence, I had to use some extreme hacking techniques to go deeper. Throughout this process, I kept asking myself if I was acting correctly. Was I protecting Emily, or was I invading her privacy? This moral dilemma pained me, but I knew that if I didn't, I might lose Emily forever. I carefully analyzed all the records of his conversations with Emily and tried to find some clues in them. I noticed that Mark was always able to accurately capture Emily's mood changes and offer comfort and support when she was most vulnerable. This precise timing made me wonder if he was using some kind of emotion analysis technique. Finally, I discovered some startling facts in a hidden record encrypted in a packet of data. Not only was Mark using virtual emotional manipulation of Emily, he was likewise involved in other similar cases of manipulation, and he continued his emotionally and financially fraudulent activities by assuming the same kinds of identities on other chat platforms. I was shocked and horrified by this revelation. Mark didn't just target Emily alone. He seems to have built a huge network of people, using different identities to keep in touch with multiple women on various platforms. This is no longer just a personal vendetta, but an organized crime. When I tracked down the multiple layers of proxies he was using, I realized that his behind-the-scenes operations were not just limited to anonymous chats. He was even using some phishing sites to get information on drawing false identities. His methods were so sophisticated that I had to admit that if it weren't for my professional background, I might never have been able to discover any of this. What's even more frightening is that Emily's online diary vaguely records some of her private conversations with Mark, which have made her trust Mark even more, and the depth of her trust makes me feel scared. She even revealed some private information about our family in the conversations, which gave Mark more leverage to manipulate her. I began to recall some of Emily's unusual behavior lately. She was often still in front of the computer late at night, sometimes suddenly depressed, and sometimes unusually excited. Now that I think about it, all of these could be the result of being manipulated by Mark. I felt a deep pang of self-blame. Why didn't I realize these abnormalities earlier? As time went on, I found myself caught in a complex technological riddle of intense anger at Mark on the one hand, and worry and pain at Emily's inability to do anything about it on the other. This invisible war was draining me, but I knew that I had to uncover the truth of it all in order to save Emily once and for all. In the process, I also began to reflect on our marriage. What made Emily so easily attracted to the virtual world? Was I neglecting her emotional needs? Was there something wrong with our communication? These questions kept circling in my mind, making me realize that solving the problem was not just about exposing Mark's true nature, but also about repairing our relationship. As I gradually uncovered Mark's hidden truths, Emily fell into deep pain and struggle. She had thought she had found a clean slate of spiritual solace, but now realized that it was only a deeper trap. I watched her agony with a twisted heart, but I didn't know how to comfort her. That night, I told her everything I had found out, including how Mark had used his virtual identity to manipulate her and what he had done on other platforms. After Emily heard it, her whole body seemed to be crushed, with confusion and despair in her eyes. "I really don't know what to do anymore, Daniel," she said, her voice trembling as she looked at me. tears welling up in her eyes. Emily, you have to leave this virtual world. It's just a dangerous trap. I said, trying to stay calm but full of pain. Let's face this together, okay? She stroked her face helplessly and whispered, I was just looking for some understanding and support, but I never expected this. I approached her and held her gently, feeling her body tremble. I knew that this process would be very painful for her, but we had to get through this together. Over the next few days, Emily became more and more silent. She reduced her contact with Mark, but still couldn't get rid of her dependence on him. She fell into deep remorse and confusion, and often stayed awake all night. I tried to stay by her side as much as possible to give her support and comfort, but I knew that true recovery would take a long time. Daniel, I'm sorry. I really don't know how I'm going to get out of this quagmire. She sat in the living room one day, her voice hoarse and weak. I walked over to her and gently held her hand, gently reassuring, Emily, I know it's hard, but I'll be there with you to get out of this. We can seek professional help, and maybe counseling will help you. She looked over at me, her eyes full of complex emotions. We try to communicate again, trying to regain those lost feelings of trust and love. But every time Mark's shadow appears, it pushes us deeper into the darkness. During that time, our relationship was on thin ice, and Emily struggled with the pain of not knowing whether to continue the broken marriage or to pursue the solace of that virtual world. Every decision she made to do so tore her up inside, and all I could do was stand by her side, powerless, and watch her suffer. Eventually, she chose a period of solitude and moved back in with her parents, hoping to find some peace of mind in a familiar home environment. This decision frustrated me, but I understood her need. We agreed to stay in touch and meet regularly to attend counseling together. This painful time reinforced my belief that we had to be completely free of Mark's control in order to start over. But at the same time, I realized that it was not enough to reveal the truth. We also needed to rebuild our trust in each other and learn to communicate and understand each other's needs better. That night, in the empty apartment, I sat silently at my desk, browsing through the chat records that had become the past. My heart was filled with determination and hope that I would not give up, that I would rescue her from the virtual maze and bring her back to the warm embrace of reality. Because I know this may be our only chance. At the same time, I began to think about how to change myself, how to be a better husband, and how to give Emily the understanding and support she needs in the real world. Despite our constant attempts to repair our marriage, the deep wounds and endless arguments had made it impossible for us to return to what we once had. Emily's decisions became clearer as she went through a painful period of reflection during her time alone. During this time, I was also looking at myself and thinking about what had gone wrong in our relationship. I think back to our first encounter, when Emily was a vibrant lover of literature and I was a programmer immersed in the world of code. We met through mutual friends and were quickly drawn to each other. I loved her enthusiasm and creativity, and she appreciated my rationality and steadiness. We had thought that this complementarity would make our relationship stronger, but in hindsight, perhaps it was this very difference that alienated us. One quiet evening, we sat down again in the living room, facing each other, knowing in our hearts that we were about to make an important decision about our future. The moonlight from the window fell on Emily's face, and I could see the fatigue and hesitation in her eyes. Daniel, I think we really need to rethink our relationship, Emily whispered, her eyes glistening with tears. My heart tightened, and despite my foreboding, I still felt a tremendous amount of pain. Emily, are you really sure? Is there anything else we can do to save our marriage? My voice trembled a little, trying to control my emotions. She took a deep breath and said firmly, We've tried a lot, but the experience has hurt our relationship so deeply that maybe we need a fresh start. She paused and continued, Daniel, I know you've been trying, but sometimes trying doesn't solve everything. Tears slowly rose in my eyes as well, and I nodded my head, my voice low but resolute. If this is your final decision, I respect your choice. I don't want you to continue living in pain and entanglement. But Emily, I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here for you. At that moment, we completely realized that this marriage could only go so far. Looking into each other's eyes, we were both filled with reluctance and helplessness, but divorce seemed to be our only way out. We both realized that sometimes love is not enough. What we need is understanding, trust, and growing together. Over the next few weeks, we began to work on the divorce. Every signature, every negotiation cut us to the core. The vows we had made, the future we had pictured, all came to naught in this paperwork. In the process, we also reviewed our married life. We discussed our expectations of each other, our missteps, and those moments that could have been changed. These conversations were painful, but they also gave us a deeper understanding of ourselves and each other. Emily mentioned that she often felt lonely and felt that I didn't understand her creative world. I, in turn, admitted that I was so focused on my work that I neglected her emotional needs. We both realized that the lack of communication was one of the main reasons for the breakdown of our relationship. A few weeks later, we officially filed for divorce. That day in the courtroom, the judge announced in simple language that our marriage was officially over. Looking at Emily, so many memories came flooding back to me, each moment so clear and so far away. I thought of our first date, our wedding, every happy moment we spent together. These memories gave me a pang of deep sadness, but at the same time made me realize that the beauty we once had was real. When we left the courtroom, we walked out of the building side by side, without saying much to each other, but still with deep wishes for each other in our hearts. The sunlight poured over us as if it were a blessing for a new life. "Daniel, I hope you find your own happiness," she said softly, complex emotions shining in her eyes. I could see the apology, the reluctance, and the anticipation for the future in her eyes. I nodded and responded, "You too, Emily, and no matter what, I'll always remember our years. Thank you for giving me so many wonderful memories," I said sincerely, trying to keep my emotions in check. We hugged each other, a hug that contained too many emotions for words. Then we each left to start our own new lives. The days after the divorce were not so easy. Even though we each chose to go in a new direction, the years we shared were still rooted in our hearts and could not be easily erased. I began to re-examine my life and think about how to find a new balance without Emily. Emily moved out of our apartment into a place with a great view to get back into her writing. She turned her inner pain and experiences into a book about technology and humanity, about her loss and rebirth in the virtual world. The book received widespread attention and allowed her to find new meaning and strength. I am happy for her and also relieved that she was able to draw from that painful experience. One day we met by chance at a literary event. She looked more determined than ever, with a glint in her eye of the confidence she had once lost. I was surprised and pleased by her change. "Emily, you look good," I said to her with a smile, trying to hide my inner turmoil. "Thank you, Daniel," she responded with a smile. "These years have taught me a lot and matured me a lot. I hope all is well with you as well." Although our encounter was filled with warmth and care, there are still unresolved emotions in my heart. Whenever I see her, I still think of the good and the painful experiences I had. But I also realize that we're both moving on, and that's a good thing. And I went back to work, no longer immersed in programs and code as I was before. I decided to start a cybersecurity consulting company dedicated to helping businesses and individuals improve their cyber defenses. Through my efforts, I hope to make more people safe from cyber hazards. This decision was somewhat inspired by our experiences, and I want to do my part to create a safer online environment. My daily work gradually brought me back to the rhythm of life, but every late night, I still couldn't shake the thoughts of Emily and the pain of that marriage. I began to learn how to be alone, how to face an empty apartment, and how to find meaning in my life without her. The process was difficult, but it also gave me a chance to learn more about myself. Once at a company meeting, I overheard my coworkers discussing Emily's new book, and they praised her writing and insight. I felt a twinge of pride, yet I also knew deep down that there was no going back to the way things were between us. This complex emotion made me realize that although we had separated, Emily would always be an important part of my life. Even though we are divorced, I still follow her and care about her life. I know that she is also silently watching over me. The love and pain that once existed between us is like a deep mark, both a scar and a proof of growth. Life after divorce has been challenging and lonely, but it has also taught me gradually how to face and deal with these emotions. I know that while technology brings convenience, it also hides great risks. Through this experience, I have learned to be more vigilant and protective of my identity, and I hope to use my experience to help more people. I started attending social events, meeting new people, and trying new hobbies. These experiences made me realize that life didn't end with divorce. Rather, it opened up new possibilities for me. There will always be nights when I will sit quietly in my study, looking out the window at night, remembering what we once were. Although we chose our own paths, that emotion and care for each other still wells up in our hearts, and those traces of years will always be with us. I have learned to cherish these memories, and at the same time look forward to the new surprises that the future may bring. In this era of rapid technological advancement, our story may be just one of many similar experiences. But I believe that by sharing our experiences, we can help more people understand the balance between the virtual world and real life, and cherish real emotional connections. This may be the most valuable gift from our former marriage and now our separation. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.